We've got questions. Graham Goodwin, another singing intro by me. You can tell that I'm drunk early in the day here in California. You are in Le Mans with the dear assortment of dailysportscar.com contributors and felons. It is time for our first, since we just started this podcast in the beginning of February, our first ever 24-hour of Le Mans preview, and that preview is also slanted in one specific direction that you suggested, and what is that?
Well, it's going to be effectively a preview driven by you, the listeners. It's your questions answered, which we hope are going to draw us into a lot of the talking points that will define the direction of this event and, from Saturday through to Sunday, this race.
Beautiful. So we have 40 plus questions that have come in. We are going to do our best to answer as many as possible in the allotted time. What is that allotted time, Graham? I don't know, but there's a point where you and I just started getting a wee bit rummy when it comes to answering questions. So we will go as long as our brains comply. In terms of this preview, again, it's 100% driven by you. The listener, Graham, and I have pontificated plenty leading up to the race about who we thought would be sharp, who might not, BOP, etc. So we are going to be the ones just answering your questions and or sharing your thoughts and opinions. Starting with Adam Smith. If Juan Pablo Montoya wins in class, will he count it as the Triple Crown? I say absolutely not, nor should we. What do you think, Graham?
No, well, he shouldn't, but I've zero doubt that he will do so in conversation with one person alone, and that would be Fernando Alonso. So The next conversation you would have after that, it certainly would count as a Triple Crown, but that's the only place it would. It's pretty clear to me. I did ask the man himself the question at scrutineering yesterday, and pretty clear to me, although he wasn't really revealing his hand, that he has a background plan here. This is part of his, a lifetime opportunity, isn't it, to get that Triple Crown, to be in an LMP1 car. The likelihood is we'll see more of those seats available in the coming years, and he's far from done yet, is he?
And we should explain and or apologize up front. Graham is calling us, doing his absolute best from Wi-Fi a little bit remotely in France. So if you hear him break up just a little bit like you might have just now, it's not your connection or your stream. It's just we are trying to communicate via Skype half a world away. So I would say as well, because this is certainly a question, Graham, that has come up multiple times. If someone were to win the Monaco Grand Prix in Formula 2 and then won the other, won Le Mans overall, won the Indy 500, would we consider them a Triple Crown winner? We would say absolutely not. It's second tier. Or if someone won the Indy Lights race, the Freedom 100 at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, plus overall at the other two, we would say no. And so, again, I think in this instance, it's fairly clear that since JPM is an LMP2, there is not much of a conversation to be had about its true place as whether he would be part of, considered the third person to win the rare Triple Crown. He's just in the wrong class. Not that he can't win LMP2, but he would not be a Triple Crown winner in our books. All right, again, critical question right off the block here. Ryan Casillas with Paul Dallalana in the race. Is the ACO taking any preventative measures, Graham, against random bear attacks?
They don't have to rely on the ACO. The Aston Martin racing team have had Paul along now for quite some time. They're well drilled on this. They have a plan. The first plan of action would be effectively to scream at the bear. Pedro Lamy is the nominated first man to do that. If that doesn't work, they'll just get somebody louder.
Ooh, well, I like that. Volume-based bear deterrence. And for those of you wondering what the heck we're talking about, we have been kidding for quite some time about bear attacks in Canada and whether Canadian drivers racing abroad are subject to local bear attacks because possibly the Canadian bears share with their friends that Canadians are tasty. So we are serious on rare occasions here. Where shall we go next in terms of questions, Mr.
Oh, come on. There's a prediction one. And this will not, I'm sure, be the last one. But let's go with Adam Bowman. I asked last week for predictions. What he was really after is who as racing fans do you want to see win just from the heart? Now, I'm dead lucky because actually, two of the teams I would have liked to have seen win from the heart did win last year. Aston Martin Racing took a win in dramatic style in the GT Pro class, and I have a real soft spot for JMW Motorsports, and they brought home the trophy last year as well. So I'm going to ask you to kick off this one.
I would say, having just seen some nice photos of a garage featuring a couple of American drivers, that if you just use how they're presented on that, you would say that their name is Plong and Spunpily. I am loving Tim Pappas, Patrick Long, Spencer Pumpelly entry with the champion branding on their Porsche. I would love to see them do something strong in GTE Am. In GTE Pro, again, just strictly going by, as a fan, who would you like to see win? It's a little hard to say in GTE Pro for me. I'm a fan of all. I would say, Porsche winning on the GT side with one of their 911 RSRs, it would be the best sounding victory we've had at Le Mans in quite some time. But I'm a big fan of the underdogs, so we don't have a ton in the true sense of the word, Graham. I don't think the BMW, the M-Tech team are going to have all the desired results they wanted. Is it too strange to position Corvette Racing as an underdog, knowing that pace hasn't always been in their favor? They were in with a shot towards the end of last year for sure, but I don't know. Let me just be blatantly rooting for the home team and say Corvette in GTE Pro, again knowing that Ford won here a couple years ago. So on the LMP2 front, I don't know if anything jumps out to me fan wise, or I'm like, oh, if they were to win, that would be wonderful. But I would say that if you have a heart in LMP1, you're looking at Toyota. The only thing I will say is that if they do win, which I expect them to win, it would just be sad from the context of they did not beat another factory entry to get that win. So I don't know if it will be hollow in any way for them, provided they do win, but knocking off Porsche, knocking off Audi to get that overall win. Without them there, I don't know if taking down Dragon Speed, SMP, CEFC, TRSM, Bicolis, or Rebellion is the thing that they envisioned as truly adding all the weight and gravity to such a result. But heart-wise, fan-wise, I don't know if Toyota, Graham, could survive one day past the checkered flag if they don't win.
I think that's a fair call. I mean, it's certainly going to be a very, very tough one for them. On the Corvette front, there is one other reason why I think a bit of heart going towards Corvette. Next year will be their 20th year. It's their 20th anniversary as a team this year. 20th year at Le Mans will be next year. Missed out the very final lap last year on what would have been a 9th win. If they take the 9th win here this year, it could be a nice round 10 and a nice round 20. And that would be, a nice bit of racing history, wouldn't it?
It absolutely would. Let's see. Adam Smith again. How do the cars get to Le Mans from the United States? Shipped by boat or flown in style? Now, I would love to say, Adam, that they were dangled from a cargo net beneath helicopters. That would be kind of fun. Air freighting is the most common option. There are some teams that I know that if they have a specific car dedicated for Le Mans, compared to one that was just recently on track somewhere, that they will try and go by boat and do a shipping container because it's much cheaper. And for teams as well with pit equipment and whatnot, provided they have enough, they will definitely try and container that over by boat to save the big dollars on air freighting.
There's one other thing. It was the if I remember rightly, Paul Gentilosi's effort with Jaguar. I believe they posted that car in small pieces.
Well,
they never did find the badge.
I think I might be to blame. I'm to blame for many things, but I think I might be to blame for a mid race week change of support transporter for Rocket Sports appearance here with the GT2 specification Jaguar, because I think I'd written on Monday or Tuesday that it looked like I don't remember how I wrote it, but whatever transporter they rocked up in, Graham, it looked like that thing had been sitting out behind a barn for about 20 years. I mean, it even just at a club racing meet, you would look at it and go, ugh, really? And just wrote that it's the only thing in the paddock that looks like it doesn't belong. And then I think about 36 hours later, they had rented, leased, or something, a more modern transporter that didn't look like it only cost $5 to acquire. And then they were trying to upgrade some of the other signage for the team and whatnot. So look, it's them coming over trying to put together that program for the first time with not a whole ton of money put into it, maybe. And it just looked the part. So they had to kind of step up a little bit. But anyways, yeah, hopefully we won't see that thing back. Alan Napier. Last year, after 12 years with the same set of digits, I raced with a new car/driver number. After 3 laps, I got fired off into the wall on Hangar Straight, was sent for MRI scans, and spent far too much time in the Silverstone Medical Center. Suffice to say, I will be racing with that number again, because, as we know, crashes are due to the choice of number placed on the side of the car. To that end, can you and Graham tell us some stories about race or driver numbers which were retired for posterity or crossed out under a bad sign? Much love, your number one fan, Andy Napier.
Tends to be the other way round. Tends to be teams that go with the same numbers or combinations of numbers. United Autosports always with 3s and 2s, and you've told that tale before. Rebellion with 13. They've always liked that, which is why we got the 1 and the 3. Can't tell you that I can think of a single team that's retired a number. I mean, the odd one is that I think probably if we were to look at the principle that I'm on 24 hours over the last 5 or 6 years, probably Toyota are the team that's run with the most different numbers, because they've had 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. Did we have 9 as well? I think we did.
They might be consulting Andy here for the, well, that one didn't work. Oh, that was a bad one. Oh,
absolutely.
Nope. Yeah, Andy, same thing for me. I can't really think of any retired for posterity. And this is outside of sports cars, but I'll just offer it because it amused me at least. So in IndyCar, specifically at the Indy 500, there's been a couple of long-standing concerns, some superstitions. One of them is that the color green is unlucky. If your car bears green on it in any way, you'll be unlucky, you'll crash, it'll blow up something. There's some other weird ones, like eating peanuts in the pits is bad luck. We'll forget that has nothing to do with it, but that was probably the stupidest one I've ever heard. But green, definitely bad. And then the number 13, obviously, it's the worst in the world. I love the fact that this year, for her farewell to motor racing, Danica Patrick at the Indy 500 chose a green car bearing the number 13. She was doubling down on superstitions. She also spun on her own and crashed. So, again, maybe the superstition should be heeded. Maybe there are ghouls and goblins around racetracks paying particular attention to car number or color. But that's really the best that comes to mind, just a little bit in the opposite direction of someone flaunting whatever superstition might be. But at least in her case, Danica got caught out. Don Gregory. And maybe you're asking this because you know I'm in California. We all know about the tobacco sponsorship ban. However, do you think with the increase in the legalization of recreational marijuana use that the door could possibly open for the pot industry to start sponsoring teams in motorsports? Funnily enough,
well, we've had Coke, so there's no reason why we shouldn't have pot as well.
Well, that was more of a private sponsor for
right.
A number of crew members and marijuana as well, team owners and whatnot. Interesting question, Don. I've wondered about that as well. I mean, at least here in California and in a number of states in the United States, the legalization of marijuana, dispensaries and such, you would think with the money coming in for that might lead to sponsorship. I also think that, again, I can only speak, I honestly don't know about this same kind of growth, opening of this internationally. I would say that in many instances, for what I've seen, at least here in the States, Don, there's concern that you don't want to flaunt this too heavily our current administration in Washington, D.C., and I don't just mean President Trump, I mean just a number of folks in the cabinet, seem to not favor such a thing, might possibly want to try and roll back some of these permissions. So I would say that sponsoring and doing some sort of large sports-based, look, come and get your marijuana, might not be the thing that would keep some of these businesses open. I mean, I can tell you, and you might, whether you believe it or not, I don't know, but despite growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is probably one of the more liberal places on the planet, and where I think marijuana use among all forms of drug use has been a fairly open thing, I have never tried or cared for any of it. I had stepbrothers who smoked, snorted, and did everything possible, and I saw their lives fall into disrepair, so there was never any question as to what road that would lead. I just mention this because the one thing I hated most in motor racing was the tobacco sponsorship, because people handing out free cigarettes and lots of cigarette smoke in the air at the races just bothered the heck out of me. Again, I know that's me. Other folks might not care. Same general mindset when it would come to something like dispensaries or growers sponsoring in motor racing. Not saying that the money couldn't be used by teams, but the thought of walking around with clouds of pot smoke, that just it would probably actually make me vomit, because I can't stomach it too well. So that's more on the personal level, but I hope it doesn't happen. But that's just me, and maybe I'm a square. Off we go to the next question, my friend.
We will. It's Andrew Backer, and it says in 2016, Corvette received a race week BOP adjustment, did not have the new restrictor plate size available on hand. Have they changed procedures to avoid this in future? No. They would expect the issue to be dealt with by the team. They will take a decision based on performance, and they will expect that to be sorted. We've seen all sorts of things to do with oddness to do with componentry. I can remember. I think it was Labra competition in the WEC and GTAM some years ago. Having set pole position, the car went to scrutineering tech for inspection. Car going through in the level crossing behind us, and was removed from the qualifying session because there is a valve the rear of the car which prevents fuel from flowing out of the systems if the car becomes inverted. That part was not an FIA mandated part.
Yeah.
It was a part. Remember this one, Marshall?
Yeah.
And it was changed years before by Corvette Racing, approved by IMSA. Never changed the homologation papers, and that caught them out. I think it was something like, it went back to GT1 days. It was 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. But that is an indication of where just a decision made with the car internationally with a part can have far-reaching effects. I don't think that car came even close to, certainly not a win and a pole position after that point. But they're back this year at the Le Mans 24 Hours with a LMP2 entry, a Ligier, with, I think, the man in race this year. There's the longest gap between appearances. That is a man called Romano Ricci. He appeared with his father, who at that stage we didn't know he did, was suffering from terminal cancer. He wanted to race at Le Mans with his son, Romano. Romano is back 18 years later to take his next start.
Wow, how awesome is that?
All good.
Let's see. Nick Wade. Hi, guys. Long-time listener, first-time caller. With all the talk of new P1 cars, what do you think the chances are of seeing a P2 on the overall Le Mans podium again? Keep up the great work and love the show. I would say, Nick, a very, very, very strange universe we would live in if last year's almost kind of sort of semi just about maybe possibly kind of sort of win that we had from the lovely folks at Jackie Chan DC Racing. I would say cherish that. I would say look at that as just an amazing thing that we will probably never see in our lifetime again. I know, famous last words, of course, we're probably going to have here on Sunday a P2, 1, 2, 3 overall podium. But yeah, I think last year was just the perfect collision of crazy circumstances. And even with whatever change might be coming to P1 Graham, with the cars maybe being slower, not having as much power, whatever it is, I don't foresee P2 being something that really gets itself back in that position again.
I would say this, that what it showed us last year was there was pretty remarkable reliability in the UP2 cars. Gibson have built a fine engine
Oh, full
for those
full measure,
cars.
full marks to them.
Absolutely. And if it does become a race of attrition, it could get interesting. It could get very interesting. The other thing in the favour of that scenario is that the majority of the P1 car 50% more this year than last year, which in numerical terms, I guess you would mean means it would be that proportion less likely. But they are very new, and a lot of them have not had a lot of testing. So let's keep an eye on this one. We did have that extraordinary race last year where the astounding LMP1 cars just fell away and fell away and fell away, and then it was left to the last man standing, really, and Porsche having turned their car around in an hour as opposed to 2 hours for Toyota, managed to actually get the car back out in time to chase down and pass that gaggle of P2 cars. Never say never. I agree with you. I think it's less likely. I think we could see a P2 car on the podium.
Wow. Well, this feels like a place you and I should make a wager. What should we bet?
I bet now.
Money's boring. Material possessions, all about that. What should we bet?
What about are you going to be at the 6 hours of the? What are you going to be at the 6 hours of the Glen?
Maybe there's some negotiation because it falls on my wife's birthday.
Oh dear me. Well, there you go. That's it. If you're at the Glen and you manage to bring your wife with you, if I win, I'll take her to dinner.
That is just a winning proposition no matter what. So I think I might have to get some input from Mrs. Pruett, but that might actually be something that bet or not.
We'll come up with something, or indeed, what you guys can do is tell us what the bet should be.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah,
Works for me.
That is absolutely some social media interaction we need. What should the bet be?
Stephen Killsdonk says, what event or moment hooked you as fans of the Le Mans 24-hour race?
I saw Stephen last month at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, by the way. So
excellent.
Thanks,
excellent. For me, it was the 1999 race with the visual diversity of car designs, the number of factory entries battling for overall honours. Great question. It wasn't an easy race to follow in the early years for me, and it was a late start in kind of age terms for me. It became important for me as a dad. My then young son, my first marriage didn't last all that long. My son has lasted 30 years so far, and at 7 years old, in 1995, James declared to me, because we did that thing, we went as father and son to a lot of race meetings, and he wanted to go and watch the McLarens at Le Mans. We did. We went off and did that. It was horrible weather, but the event completely enchanted us. And for me, the moment was we did what I always advise people to do when they're coming to a sports car race. We picked a couple of cars. The car we picked had my hero aboard. It was one Derek Bell with his son in the Harrods McLaren, and that car nearly won. Gearbox issues hit the car in the late stages. It faded, but that car was in the mix, and for me, that was the moment. It was following a car that emerged from that pack, a car that we'd gone there to see, and it nearly did it. I loved it. I loved that car. I got a chance to ride in that car before it was sold from under that prospect just a little while ago by a very good friend of mine. And that was a moment for me, MP.
Brilliant. Apologies there again for a little bit of Wi-Fi breaking up, but we are doing our best and we appreciate your understanding. Stephen, for me, it was the 1988 24 Hours of Le Mans. As I've professed here many times, I was a child of the 1980s IMSA series, GTP in particular. Absolutely loved when the TWR, Tom Walkinshaw Racing Jaguars, showed up in 1988. They promptly won the 24 Hours of Daytona, and I was following them intently from there on. And their win in 1988 was something that I just drank in completely. And I haven't been able to get all three members of the team together for interviews, but I have been fortunate to interview Jan Lammers and Andy Wallace more than once about this, and I think I might have mentioned recently I just interviewed Andy again about this, so we're actually going to have a podcast here I'll get up shortly about that 1988 win on its 30th anniversary, and also have a video that I shot on the 20th anniversary from 2008 with both Jan and Andy sitting down together and sharing some fun stories. So for me, it was 88, really hooking me on Le Mans specifically. Knew about it, had an interest in it beforehand, but that was when the hook was set. And as a young race car mechanic then, that was right around the time when I added a little bit of diversity, having worked exclusively on small junior open wheel cars, Formula Fords, Formula Ford 2000, even Formula Atlantics a little bit. Right around 88 is when I started working on some small prototypes by the name of Sports 2000 in terms of formula. And so that for me was just a nice little collision of really, although I'd been a fan of IMSA for many years, the fact that Le Mans really grew in importance for me in '88. I think I was 17 at the time, would have turned 18 at the end of the year. Yeah, just meant a lot. Plus the fact that I was working on some small prototypes in my brain, it was like, oh, cool. So that's my little answer there. Buddy Campbell, he says, I saw that in the new top class regulations, they were going to allow smaller specialty manufacturers. I know Pano's tried to make a DPI car. Any others that might have shown interest? Well, buddy, if you've seen the regulations, please send them to us, because we haven't. We know that they're coming out here. We know that there are suggestions and, a lot of possibilities of what could be coming. What have you heard, Graham, in terms of that embrace of smaller manufacturers and also any new names that might come in on the prototype side?
A couple of things. You'll hear all sorts of rumours in the next few days. I can tell you who's been in the room for discussion of these new regulations. Toyota have certainly been there. Aston Martin have been there. McLaren have been there. I know Ford have been involved. BMW have been involved. And I know not interested in the 2020 regulations, but I think we'll hear about 2024 and hydrogen as well on Friday, and they're certainly interested in that. Beyond that, Ferrari have certainly been in the room for that. That would be awesome if we get anything back. There was anything like a factory effort there. The one that occurs to me that one or two that have occurred to me that they've certainly shown some interest, whether or not driven by the factory or driven by a team that would like to do so on that factory's behalf. TVR certainly are interested in coming back in, whether or not it becomes with a GT team or obviously now branding the Rebellion team with a prototype of their own making. Alpine, the Renault offshoot, back on sale. Saw the first of those cars I've seen today. Quite expensive, but a pretty little thing. And an awful lot of the potential teams interested in seeing what they can do for emergent OEM nations, including China, to come into LMP1. So who knows what might be the next big thing. We've got some real potential here. Friday's going to be interesting. The months that follow are going to be more interesting as we start to see whether or not people can walk the walk as well as talk the talk.
And this would not be a smaller boutique manufacturer, buddy, but I did speak with Mark Rushbrook, head of Ford Performance here in the last couple of days. I haven't worked it up into a story. It was just mostly stuff on the Ford GT bits. Asked him if there's any further updates on the interest he acknowledged they had in DPI and these future regulations. And he said, honestly, I have nothing to offer other than my standard answer. But I keep hearing, Graham, and I'm sure others keep hearing that Ford is expressing more interest in heading down this route. Not saying it's going to happen, and Mark obviously wouldn't be drawn on that, but it's a lot better than it's dead and it's over with, which is the case with Lexus, for example, which we've been speaking about for more than a year, as possibly moving up to DPI, and had confirmation we gave on the show, I don't know, a month or so ago that had indeed gone away. So hopefully we have more folks wanting to look in once these new regulations are confirmed. Let's see, I'm going to go to Hunter Reeve here because I know you try not to do too much of the self-promotion. Hunter Reeve says, odd question, but here's mine. Imagine you're about to attend your first 24 Hours of Le Mans. Now imagine you're really sick and might not be able to attend. What do you do to get over your frustration? Hunter, I don't know where you are. I don't know if you're based in the U.S. or where else, but I will share this. RadioLeMans.com. That is how you get over the frustration, because with the good work of the gentleman on the other end of this line, Graham Goodwin, with John Hindhoff, Johnny Palmer, Joe Bradley, Shea Adam, and so many others that make up the Radio Le Mans team, it is genuinely the closest you are going to feel to being at the event, even though you cannot due to illness. And that's not me blowing smoke. I'm not being paid to say this, although they are friends and I've been part of the Radio Le Mans family for a long time. I'm going to be listening to Radio Le Mans from my, again, I'm not going this year, 2 years in a row, but this is my first time catching the 24 Hours of Le Mans at home since 2006. And as I did back then, and as I will do now, and as I've done every year while at the event, I either have my little scanner or radio and headset walking around the track during practice, qualifying in the race, listening to Radio Le Mans. Have been fortunate to be in the booth to cover some stints during the race at Le Mans with RLM. Regardless, this is truly the best you're going to come across on radio that I know of that is presenting any major motor racing event in the world, period. NASCAR, IndyCar, you name it. I'm not speaking ill of anyone else. I'm just saying that even they understand, holy cow, the quality and depth being offered, the insight and analysis, there is truly nothing like it. So, and I'll just add one more layer here before we move on, Hunter. As a reporter, as a journalist, I'm listening to Radio Le Mans the whole time I'm there, or at home, or wherever, because that's where I'm getting the most accurate and the fastest information as to what's happening. So just imagine being in France at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, seeing the cars in front of you and realizing that the airwaves, the radio airwaves going into my ears, is actually providing me better information than what I'm seeing with my own eyes. That's rather phenomenal. So I hate that you were going to be able to go and can't. I don't know what your options are for television, which is what I was saying. I'm not sure what part of the world you're in. If you're in North America, and provided you have, or I should say the United States, and I believe Canada as well, you should be able to watch the entire thing via Velocity cable network. I know that their presenters, they're using the Eurosport feed, and I will just tell you that while I will likely be watching the 24 Hours of Le Mans, as much of it as I can, on my television, on the Velocity station, the television will be set to mute. And I will have Graham, Hindy, Shea, and others telling the story because they're the best at doing it. So I hope that is as close to something positive for you, but they are phenomenal storytellers instead of folks just reporting the action. And that I'm hoping you might find will ease the frustration somewhat.
And I can tell you, I've not actually been across yet to the studio. Unfortunately, they've given the wrong pass, so that gets sorted tomorrow.
But not I can very tell good you, at the administration side, apparently, though, and the passes aren't very good. But at least when you listen in.
But I can tell you a lot of excitement amongst the crew this year. It is a phenomenal privilege to be a part of that team. My history as a trackside fan was not that long before someone handed me a mic, and I've been doing it now for a better part of 14, 15 years. And I'm looking forward to it enormously. It is phenomenally hard work, but it just doesn't feel like it. And that's what you get when you work with truly awesome people. And I'm really, if that is the case and you're not able to make it, and I'm really, really sorry. There will be other opportunities, and it won't be your last. That's the thing. Once you are part of that Le Mans 24 Hours event, you will get drawn back. Believe me. So. Do listen in. Don't ignore it. Listen in, watch in, and let's see what you can squeeze out of that one. And drop us a line on Twitter, on Facebook, and we'll give you a shout out and see if we can put a smile on your face, Hunter. Hope you're feeling okay, and I hope we see you in 2019.
Where are we going next, my friend?
We're going to go with David Faulkner. We asked particularly for questions about the Le Mans 24 Hours. This is one. If it turns and people privateers has found a way to go faster or longer stints than the regs we're aiming at, does the ACO and the race stewards have a penalty for being outside of the OT without actually breaking any technical regulations similar to the Lance Team Audi event at Daytona. Well, actually, the number of laps is capped
Yeah.
by regulation, not technical, but sporting regulation. So that would be a penalty. In terms of going faster, yet to be seen, I think is the answer there. All sorts of rumour, speculation, etc., etc. I'd like to think they wouldn't be that blunt. Whether or not there'd be a direct penalty applied for that reason, or how can we put this, that some other misfortune of a regulatory nature might befall the team in the pretty immediate aftermath of that, we'll wait and see. This is not quite as blunt a tool as perhaps others and I have indicated might. Certainly are looking to enforce a message that there is an efficiency advantage for the Toyotas, because you know what? There is an efficiency advantage for the Toyotas. They are going to be using something like half the fuel over those stints. The way in which it's been done is artificial and therefore leaves a little bit of a bad taste in the mouth. I think what we're going to see are 3 or 4 of those LMP1 privateer cars tooth and nail at the start of this race until we get through to the first pit stop cycle. After that, they'll be pushing as hard as they possibly can to stay in touch pressure on Toyota. Because what they will not want is for Toyota to be able to cruise to that victory. It's going to be about staying as close as they can and waiting for a problem to come. Because you know what? It will. It's not an if, it will. The question is only how long will that problem take, and will it affect 1 or 2 Toyotas? That, to me, is the underlying tale of LMP1.
Want to take the next one from Doug Bonham?
I'll go for that. GTA Pro looks absolutely, yeah, it does. Is it realistic to keep expecting great GT battles as in past years? Aston BMW might allegedly have the Carlsoon anvil stuck in the trunk. Corvette using a C7R that's been racing at Le Mans against 2 generations of models from Ferrari, Aston and Porsche. Can we expect what has become an annual treat to somehow continue, or is it competition of which Porsche runs away to hide? You want a first crack at that?
Sure. I mean, Doug, it's funny. I could have written that same thing. So yeah, you and I share identical concerns. Reliability for the Astons, big question. BMW, I don't know if reliability so much. I mean, we did see in the longer races here in America with the brand new M8 GTE that BMW team RLL found a lot of areas to improve on that front. But could there be some reliability issues there? Yes. Pace, I would say, might be a primary concern for one, if not both of those models. The Corvette definitely, yeah, in what we think might be its final go-round at Le Mans before the widely rumored, if not, we know, worst-kept secret mid-engine Corvette comes online, the C8R. Could that be showing up next year? We'll have to see. Yeah, again, question there because of the car's age. You could say, well, they know a lot about it, etc., etc. Therefore, they should get the most out of it. Believe that is true, but to your point, its age is something where through BOP there would need to be a little bit of help to keep it in the fight. We'll have to see if that happens. Yeah, I mean, between, I would say, Ferrari or Porsche are certainly the 2 marks that I'm keeping my eye on performance-wise. That's about as far as I can go because I don't honestly have any predictions to offer because we're going to need to see what turns up once cars hit the track in anger tomorrow night. The next question from Matt Markland I'm going to skip because, frankly, it is rather... one section of it is rather graceless in a comment towards something you made last week, and
in carrying this formative.
Yeah, and I would say folks are more than welcome to say whatever negative things you want about us, but in this case, I don't particularly care for how that was phrased, Matt, so I'm not going to include that because I think Graham deserves a little bit more respect than that. Let's see. Let's go to John Johnson, one of our favorite friends from the Witness Relocation Program. He says, "What's up, boys? Apart from the start and the finish, what are the can't-miss times to be tuning in for those of us who can't spare the time to watch the entire race?" Jim DeVito, of course, replied to John, "Quit your job, dump your girlfriend, and watch the whole race." I would say this, John, just from what I have found, the transition into darkness is fascinating. Also, knowing that Le Mans, say, compared to the 24 Hours of Daytona, which at Daytona it seems like nighttime lasts forever, at Le Mans it seems like the sun goes down and then it's right back up again. So we don't get a lot of darkness since the sun does set so late Saturday evening. But that move into darkness is fascinating to watch from a performance standpoint. And if we do get some rain, boy, that's really where you get to see some truly star performances come out. So watch that move into darkness. And again, I would suggest listening to Radio Le Mans because they will be calling out the performers who do start to jump out when vision gets a little bit questionable because most of the track is not well lit. And then if rain is coming, that's another area where we can see some drivers truly jump out and do impressive things.
Oddly enough, MP, one of the other periods of the race, which is always worth watching, is the other side of the nighttime equation. As we come into the morning, cool air, get some very quick lap times there. It also tends to be, as the heat of the day starts to kind of build, the point at which you start to get more problems for some of those cars. And of course, they tend to be the cars that have been run hardest overnight, which tends to be the ones who are either chasing or being chased. So certainly, I think I'd absolutely agree with you. Into darkness, don't miss the opportunity if you've got a good TV setup to watch through some of the darkness, because the cameras now, the HD cameras are fantastic, and into the morning. But catch as much as you can. And as many ways as you can, because they tend to reveal themselves. And again, I will give a bit of a plug for my colleagues on Radio Le Mans every hour. Summarise both where the race is actually is at the top of the hour, and actually summarise the major incidents you may have missed. If you've got something like a TiVo box or similar, you can always actually just reel it back and find out where the entertainment was.
TiVo. I haven't heard that name in a long time. I love it.
We still use them here.
Wow. Listen to that. And thanks again. I'll probably mention this a few more times, but we are doing our best with Wi-Fi in the French countryside, and I know it might come as a surprise, but the internet access available here where I live on the fringes of Silicon Valley, slightly better than in the fringes of Le Mans proper. Let's see. Let's go to Scott Bayous. I probably murdered your last name, Scott, so I apologize. More of a statement than a question, but again, we didn't just ask for questions. We wanted to get some thoughts from you as well about the race. So I'd like a discussion about how easy it is for far-flung people to get to the race. I don't know what far-flung people are, but that sounds like an interesting person to meet. I've been 4 times now from the States. When I mention that to like-minded people here, they say something like, wow, it must be so hard to figure out, or I wouldn't even know where to begin. And Scott says, people need to know that you can literally fly into Paris, hop on a train, and then walk 100 yards from the train to the tram, and then be at the circuit. And you can show up with the clothes on your back, and then take the same tram to the Carrefour, which is a European version of a Target or Walmart, halfway between the circuit and downtown. Buy all the camping supplies and whatever else you could possibly need. There's no reason why you can't go to Le Mans. Graham Scott raises a wonderful point that I think if you are European, everything he just mentioned is a no-brainer, like, duh, hello, because, campsites, camping, and this kind of do-it-yourself mindset, that is just part and parcel of Le Mans. But again, if you are a far-flung person from a different continent, maybe it would come across as a rather foreboding trip. Not saying it's cheap. I mean, flying to Paris from wherever in the United States, or something across a pond, it's going to cost you a couple dollars, but Scott does raise a perfect point. You can do all the things he just mentioned on a relatively modest budget and be elbow to elbow in the mud with Dutchmen and Danes and Italians and you name it, and just loving everything that the 24 Hours of Le Mans happens to be.
If you want to take an active part in spectating that race, then more the better. So do most of the other people there. But if you don't, just want to be there with friends, you want to be there for the peripheral entertainment, or just having a good time in the campsites with a lot of beer, then that's all good too. And the best part of it is the ticket prices are a pittance compared to other major international sporting events, certainly many in Europe. If you have the thought to do it, make a project of this. Grab yourself a piece of paper or a pad. Just look out how much, or rather how little it might cost, because you will never, ever regret it. It's a friendly event, and people from all over the world are more than welcome.
Let's see. Scott Christie says, do you think manufacturers have learnt to homologate an access panel to the starter motor so you don't have to remove the rear deck? Or is it a case of it doesn't happen that often that a starter motor gets stuck? Well, a couple things. To answer the first one, we would say that, if we're talking about learning something, we'd say no, because none of them, to my knowledge, have incorporated homologated access panels to reach the starter and hit it with a stick and hammer, which is kind of the time-honored way of getting them to work. We saw last year what happened with the Jackie Chan DC Racing team. I believe it was them, unless I'm getting the team wrong.
It was Rebellion.
I apologize. Yes, I thought so. The
Yep.
Rebellion team, and the penalty that was handed down afterwards by drilling the hole to get in there and do that. It doesn't happen that often. Honestly, Scott, I would say to make that a big consideration. If a team were to try and homologate that into the bodywork, I would say it wouldn't be a bad idea by any stretch. But the old whack in the starter isn't always the easiest, and depending on the model of prototype or even GT, I guess for that matter, sometimes those starters can get buried in the bell housing a little bit, or might not be as just open and readily exposed as they once were. So I would say it's not a universal thing for every car, that if you were to put an access panel, you could reach it easily and try and see if you can knock some life into it. So
it's not like the old MG Lola starternator. That thing used to have a lot of problems, and as I recall, we had similar problems with the Caddy LMP 900s with starter issues as well, with heat soak. I think it was particularly a problem there. But yeah, it's a shame, because I think actually what the wider issue for Rebellion was, but they tried to hide that they'd done it, and and that was inevitable disqualification, I'm afraid. Real shame.
Jerry Suddeth, thank you again, Jerry. Always, you're one of the most consistent questioners that we have on the Week in Sports Cars podcast with Graham Goodwin of DailySportsCar.com. Says, I have a silly question and a more serious one. Firstly, is Dirk Mueller the best name in the race?
Nope.
Gotta admit,
No,
Jerry, that doesn't really. Dirk's name doesn't stand out to me. If it was Dirk Diggler, that would certainly be the best name in any motor racing competition.
No.
Second one,
it's Renger van der Zande. It's Renger van der Zande.
Yes.
That's the name.
That just sound that anytime you say his name, I envision the little bouncy ball above it, kind of calling out the phrasing and pattern of it. Jerry's second question says, the weather looked like it's holding fairly steady temperature-wise for the week into the weekend. Will this help at all for any of the teams that may be behind the eight ball, so to speak, with setups? Exact opposite, Jerry. You would granted, it's not as if they're going to be massively harmed in any way, but if it were raining, that would be not only the equalizer that you hear folks speak about on track performance-wise, but that would truly open the door for a team that's maybe a little bit behind on figuring out what works best for their car setup-wise in the race. If we're looking at a wet race and even wet practice sessions, that would be something where a team, I would say, could exploit a little bit of an advantage. Knowing that they had a deficit, I would say that is where that deficit goes away. All of a sudden, instead of being in a position where they are behind that proverbial eight ball, they would be starting from a mostly level setup playing field. If a team comes into the race and we're expecting a dry race, and it is a case where they are behind, if you're having to throw major things at a car in practice, you are not learning about the race. And if that is the case while your competitors are indeed working on race setups, by and large, you are still suffering and behind. So one way or the other, if you're behind coming in, race week is not the time for you to have to figure out or try and learn the things that you are short on setup-wise. So quite the opposite there, unfortunately. Let me grab one more here from Michael Wallace, then I'll pass the next couple over to you. Michael Wallace. Hey guys, loving the new Week in Sports Car sticker. Got to get me one of those. Michael, send me a little direct message on Facebook here and hit me with your address and I'll gladly send you one. Why? Because I just got a batch of a couple hundred of those show up. Ooh. Yes, so we'll be passing those off to you when I see you next, Graham, and those are just some little freebies, and as I have some time, I'll try and get some t-shirts done as well, and hopefully at a somewhat inexpensive price so folks can buy however many they want. All right, Michael asks, how come Jordan Taylor isn't driving for Corvette this year? He can do the job, has done the job for them. Is Corvette just wanting to keep the same old guys for consistency, running all year in the endurance races? And he says you can't go wrong with Mike Rockenfeller and Marcel Fessler, especially at Le Mans, but did Jordan get an offer elsewhere and turn it down? Thanks for the time from your busy schedules. I think in here there's a little bit of a unasked question of, did Jordan's issue last year and the crash damage that really took them out of contention for the win, did that possibly change Corvette Racing's attitude on bringing him back, Graham? And I don't know. How's this? I don't know the answer, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was in the mindset of at least one of the senior folks in charge of the program. They said a lot of amazingly flowery and supportive things after the race in reference to the crash and to losing the race so late in the game. But, you know, those are the things that a manufacturer would say and should say. If it was a privateer team, Graham, you might see them MFing the person. That's so-and-so and such and such. We would have won if it wasn't for his dumbass. You're not going to hear that from a manufacturer. And I'm not blaming Jordan either. I mean, good Lord, that kid has done phenomenal work for them when he's been invited into the team. But it's, you know, it is not we'll put your arm around you and everything's okay, little fella, and, you know, just everything's going to be fine. It's a steeply competitive team, and I think a misstep like that would certainly count against a driver more than, say, if a Jordan Taylor equivalent at another team, another factory GTE Pro team, made a similar mistake. So, don't know the answer, Michael, but I think there might be something there.
My answer here is it is called GTE Pro. They expect the highest professional standards, and it's not, a shot at Jordan in any way. It's just the reality that when you are considering that squad, and particularly the additional drivers in those squads, that is going to be a factor. It's not the first time we've seen it. You know, stand up people like Nico Lapierre at Toyota in recent years, where, you know, a mistake or maybe against him being part of a factory program. And, you know, I don't think there's anything really unusual about that.
Nor do I. Why don't you take the next couple, Graham?
Let's go with Elliot Bon Jovi. That looks like Bon Jovi, I think it is. Do you think Honda Acura will return to Le Mans? I 100% do. When that might happen, and whether or not that might be with a new generation of whatever replaces LMP1, or whether or not it'll be a GT car, and potentially if and when we might in the future see a hybrid regulation coming to GT racing. But I 100% think we will. I know there have been discussions, but there have been discussions with just about every manufacturer. But I have reason to believe there's been fairly recent discussions with senior people from Honda. What we don't know, of course, is whether or not those discussions were driven by Honda's interest or by the ACO manufacturers to see whether or not there might be a mutual interest coming back. It's a bit like that debate about what drives that phrase around evaluating a DPI program, isn't it? It's my firm belief that, yes, we do have a lot of manufacturers that are interested in DPI, But a lot of the ways in which these are evaluated is driven not by manufacturers, but by the chassis manufacturers, because it's in their interest, of course, to get factory programs behind their products. So, it's an interesting one. But yes, I think Honda are very much on that list of manufacturers that might well be persuaded to come back and have a crack at the Le Mans 24 Hours.
And I'll just throw in quickly on this, Elliot. We've seen that Chevrolet, through Corvette, through Cadillac, they are ready and willing fighters just about anywhere. So they are one of very few manufacturers that can say we are in NASCAR at the top level, IndyCar at the top level, sports car, dual top levels, at the top of pro GT racing and the top of pro prototype racing, again, in North America on that end, not in the WEC. But you can see that GM full in, if there's something that they find really valuable, that they, can go and race and be competitive in, they dive right in. Honda and Acura, same exact way. And while they might not be at Le Mans right now, you look at what they do here in North America with their IndyCar program, their IMSA program. They're in, both GT Daytona with a GT3 based car, customer sale there. They are in prototypes here in DPI. They're also in Formula One. I mean, they're another company that they just are looking for any excuse to go race and do something in a big or important series or event. So directly, they've shown, give us a reason. Give us an avenue to get there, and we will be part of it. So, like Graham said, firmly believe that we will see them back once these new regulations come out.
Absolutely. Johnny Thompson is our regular caller from the Witness Protection Program, and he's actually fessed up to that in his question here.
Thank you, Johnny. We knew it.
Thank you. It's brave. Seriously enjoys the show, so do we. This is a good thing. One thing I was wondering was there's talk about the non-hybrid LMP1 cars having a top speed advantage, which could lead to them actually passing the Toyotas. Do we have any speed trap data from the test day or other information as to how much of an advantage in top speed there will be? How far back will a non-hybrid be able to pick up a toe and draft up to the back? Says he's with me. I think the result is anything but a foregone conclusion. To achieve their lap times, Totus need a lot of technology to work faultlessly for 24 hours. Also know that the hybrids deliver their performance in a very different way and actually quite often will reach their peak velocity before the speed trap and then go into a lift and coast. Because a lot of the trick, if you like, the trick part of their aero is that they are able to coast not under full power for very long periods without losing too much speed. So I think there's a lot still to be proved here. This might be our first opportunity to see it. We saw certainly that the non-hybrids at the test day were quicker than the hybrids in the first and second sectors, but lost actually a chunk of time very often in the third sector, which of course includes the Porsche curves. I think we've got some certainly an interesting first half hour, 45 minutes for the 2018 Le Mans 24 Hours. After that, the way it plays out, I think will be the stuff of legends. Let's wait and see.
Yeah, Johnny, and to Graham's point, you need to think of the LMP1 hybrids, and again, there's only two of them, but you need to think of them like what they are. They do obviously have turbocharged, gasoline-powered engines, but a big portion of their power is provided by a battery-based system, and that battery is something that depletes very quickly and is deployed to boost acceleration out of the corners, and then frankly it's gone, and so it helps ramp up acceleration. It's almost how I've thought about the hybrid P1 cars for many years now. Is I think of them like dragsters, meaning off the line they shoot up to whatever their peak speed is, and more or less hold that until the finish line. And I'm not saying, of course, there's continual acceleration, but the vast majority of that is done very early on any straightaway, and once they get to that peak, they're at that peak. With the P1 hybrids, and again, there's only two of them with the Toyotas, but they're going to get to that and sit there. That's different than the non-hybrids, which have conventional engines which make all of their power and pull all the way down the straight. So to what you're looking towards and what I'm looking forward to is, do those things converge, and is there a point where some of these non-hybrid dragsters overtake the hybrid Toyotas in the rundown to the Mulsanne kinks and whatnot, the chicanes as well? What are we going to see? Looking at some of the top speeds, and Graham obviously mentioned sectors, we won't get too heavily into all this with sector analysis and whatnot, but it was interesting to see that at least coming out of the test session, the fastest top speed was set by the number 7 Toyota, 338.1 kilometers per hour. But we then moved down to everything directly behind that number 7 was a non-hybrid. 337.0 was up next with one of the S&P Racing BR1 with AER. Behind that, sister car, 336 kph. Behind that, we had actually the fourth fastest was an Oreca 07 LMP2 car at 336 kph, only 2.1 kilometers per hour off the maximum top speed, the best set by P1 Toyota. So again, it just goes to that dynamic of over a lap, nothing faster than a P1 hybrid car, and as it should be. But if we're just talking straight up top speed, those P1s do peter out now, especially with them being pegged back a little bit compared to recent years. So be interesting to see that seesaw. All right, we're getting killed out of the corners. Oh, but we might get them before turning at the end of the straight. So, that's going to be a fun part. Nicole Bitzer asks, is the race going to be crazier this year compared to past races? I like the phrasing on that, Nicole, because I do think crazy is going to be something that the element of crazy. If it was a knob for Eduardo Freitas to turn up or down in race control, I think this one might be up. Just because we don't have the full fleet of full factory P1s we've spoken about before on the show here, Graham, that reliability is going to be a question. Even for the hybrid, we don't know. Going into recent years, we had a pretty good feeling, it's going to be an Audi, it's going to be a Porsche, it's going to be a Toyota with the overall win. Porsche probably our stronger suggestion, but we knew that somewhere in there something was going to happen. We can't say this year. We don't know. Will the non-hybrid surprise us? And some of them get through relatively unscathed and win overall. P2s, again, we got a bet going as to whether one might or might not be on the podium. There's a big field of some highly skilled drivers in those P2 cars. There's also a big contingent that I wouldn't hire to drive a lawnmower. So could we see some stupid errant moves from a P2, turning in on something, not seeing they're being overtaken or whatever? Yeah, there's so many of them, and there are enough pro-am instead of full pro drivers as required in the P2 field that, I'd be absolutely worried. I think there's going to be some crazy there, Nicole.
Let's add in the other thing. The GTE thing is actually a new and bigger factor.
Yeah.
Because if it does pan out in the way that we're expected that it just might, you are going to have leading cars coming up to gaggles of well-driven GTE cars that are in close contention to each other. And it's not going to be easy for those cars to pass. And why should it be? We've already seen at the test day where one of the pro cars, in the case of Marcus Sorensen, being caught out by faster traffic. And that ended up with the Aston Martin in the fence. Do I expect it's going to be crazy? It's always crazy. And incident breeds incident every single time almost. But I think we're going to have a very exciting 2018 race.
And I also would say that this year's GTE AM category, yet again, cars that are even faster. And I would say if I'm looking at the driver lineup, the quality, again, I could be wrong, and it might just be an opinion thing, but I think this year's GTE AM driver lineup it's at least the strongest I can remember. Again, knowing that there is a mandated pro-am dynamic. I mean, there are a couple of names where I'm like, huh? Who is that? Is this another witness relocation person? But for the most part, overall, I think there's a higher quality there. So, and what does that mean? You might have fewer mistakes coming out of GTEM, but you're also going to have harder racing. So the other thing there is, what do? You're going to have faster drivers who aren't necessarily inclined to concede. So could that cause problems for the faster cars? Who knows?
Well, there's another factor as well. You well to actually mention GTM, because whilst they've got a different balance of performance, if we get a wet race, there is another confounding factor, and that is that this year the GTM cars, all on Michelin's by the way, are on the same tyres as the GT Pro car. So if you do get that balancing factor with the rain coming in, with those top guys, Pat Long, you've already mentioned. You've got Giancarlo Fisichella, Pedro Lamy amongst them, plus some young guns, kids like Matteo Caroli, Dennis Anslauer, Julian Anslauer, rather. These are quick guys who we're going to be becoming far more familiar with. These guys want to put their mark not just for their clients and their race, but for their careers too. I think you're right. GTM could be a bit of a stormer.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that. And again, to me, Nicole, this all feeds back to I'd like the crazy that's coming. It should be crazy. I'll be genuinely surprised if it isn't one of the craziest 24 Hours of Le Mans that we've seen in recent years. So, and as you might have deduced, I like crazy in my motor racing. Bob Canestraro says, "Hi, it's Bob the Broken Record. Do they do local yellows at Le Mans? If yes, why don't we see local yellows in the U.S.?" Well, Bob, we do see local yellows in the U.S. We see plenty of them, but are you referring to at sports car events, open wheel events, amateur events, professional events in the U.S.? I can't say exactly, but yes, local yellows certainly happen in the U.S. and have for quite some time. Why don't you tell us, Graham, for those who maybe aren't fully familiar on the use of marshalling flags and virtual safety cars at Le Mans, what the general practice is there?
There's a whole range of tools at the disposal of Wado Freitas and the race control team, including local yellows, including slow zones, including full safety car procedures, which at Le Mans involves 3 separate safety cars, which, by the way, means you can't make up as much ground under a safety car as at many other race meetings, certainly not laps. And the defining factor for Eduardo tends to be whether or not he's having to put his people, the marshals, extraction crews, or indeed heavy equipment in the line of fire. That's going to be the difference between a local yellow, allowing a car to recover if it's beached itself on just had a bit of a rotation.
Yeah.
But if it's going to require people coming from behind a place of safety, then he is going to intervene, and that is quite correct.
Apologize again for some of the Wi-Fi challenges we are having, but we're doing our best. We are doing our best. We need to get a longer string for the soup cans that we are using for this event.
I'll apologise too, by the way. You can possibly hear the bells in the background. That is the level crossing. So we're going to get a train any moment now on the Weekend Sports Cars podcast. Be crossing here into Arnage Village. So it's quite a busy rail line. I'm sitting within about 40 feet. Passenger trains, no problem. If it's a freight train, we're going to be stopping talking for a while.
All right. Well, we're actually, believe it or not, we're not too far away from the finish line here. I think we're doing some word talking a little faster than maybe we expected. Let's see. Tim Same from Australia.
Told you.
It's a train.
It's quite a long train.
Yeah. Good Lord. Could it be a Danish train by any chance? Is it the Dane train? I think that's actually.
And there you go. That's it. That's part of the wonderful experience that we actually have here. We wouldn't have any other.
Now, right? Graham, should we invoke a drinking game as well? And I've given Johnny crap for this before, so I don't mind giving it again. Should we give dear Johnny Palmer of Radio Le Mans another round of crap, but also create a drinking game based on every time he uses the phrase "the Dane train"? Johnny loves that phrase, the Dane train, and referring to the all Danish
The 95.
entry
The
from
95
Aston
car.
Martin Racing. Yes, but yeah, that good old phrase rolls off Johnny's tongue on seemingly a minutely basis. So I guess if you're a fan of alcohol and drunkenness, whenever you hear Johnny mention the phrase "the Dane train," knock one back and thank him for it. Don't drive, please,
I,
but
you, you surprised me there because I thought when you mentioned Johnny Palmer, you were going to mention his innate love of trains. He does have a love of trains, and wherever we are in the world, if JP's not with us, and we do see anything railway related, we will take a picture or shoot a short video, and we will send it to him. He must have about 3,500 of them now.
well, and maybe he actually doesn't really care about the nationality so much of those in the Aston Martin. It's just an excuse to say the word train with Dane in front of it. So,
Train,
who
just train.
knows? So, Tim Same, as we're talking about the Dane train, and we're just going to leave in the train going by in the background because we're freewheeling it today. Tim says, what car from a class that doesn't compete in the Le Mans 24 Hours would you enter in the race? If you could have a problem-free race with said car, where do you think you could end up finishing with it? Tim, that is an awesome question. You want to take this one to start, Graham?
Well, I'll give you a couple of bits of history. We have had, effectively NASCARs at Le Mans before.
Yes.
Yeah, we've had NASCARs. They didn't do terribly well. We've also had come very close to something that was effectively an old V8 supercar back in the day. Didn't quite make it, but we've come pretty close to that too. I think for me, Top Fuel Dragster.
So what you're saying is accelerate at the new start-finish line and then be finished at the top of the hill with big parachutes to slow it down because that's all the fuel it will actually carry distance-wise. Got it. So a team,
It's not.
if we could think in Formula E terms of exchanging cars once it was completed.
Don't you dare use that kind of language on the Weekend Sports
I-
Cars podcast, Formula E.
I-
I've said it myself.
I'll-
How dare you?
I know. We would only need how many thousands of Top Fuel dragsters to complete the race if we had to jump out of one when it ran out of fuel after 1,000 feet. Yeah, that'd be quite interesting. Man, Tim, wow, I am doing some scratching of my head, which I shouldn't do because I'll have even less hair on top of it. What would I like to bring that currently isn't? Aha, I got it.
I know. I've got one.
You know where, and you probably know where I'm going with this. Stadium Super Truck. I want to see Robbie Gordon, Jeff and Matty Brabham. Matty Brabham just won the Stadium Super Truck race last weekend at Texas. I want to see one of these 800 horsepower, essentially Baja 1000 trophy trucks, competing at Le Mans. Chicanes, did you say? Heck no. Jumped straight over them. And I think there should be some additional ramps around the track for the Stadium Super Trucks to possibly pass the competition. And again, talking about the front straight leading up to the first corner, it might, this would be the only vehicle that doesn't turn right. It would just go straight to the gravel, accelerate, and beat everyone to the Dunlop Bridge. So that's my choice, Tim. Thanks for asking.
I've got a sensible answer this time. I was going to say Group B rally car because it would be fun.
Yes.
But I'm actually going to say a proper, right now, 2018 Formula One car. Come on, then. Let's see what you've actually got over 24 hours, boys. You think you got the fastest race car? I bet you haven't over 24 hours. So I'd love to see a proper Formula One team, per their regulations, come and take on the challenge of a 24-hour race. I'd love to see what they've got.
That is fantastic. I'm going to ask you to take the next question, mainly because I have no confidence that I can produce Stathis's last name without murdering it and killing it.
Kokorogiannis. I'll keep saying it, Kokorogiannis. So it's a magnificent name. Should tell you, by the way, Statis, that on the trip over here, we did have one of the infamous Daily Sports Car road trip games, and the road trip game was which of the 24-hour drivers, and of course 180 of them, would score most with their name in Scrabble. There you go. I think you'd score a lot more than the man that won it. There you go. There's a lot in the 30s, was one in the 40s. Let's wait and see whether or not the listener can actually come in with that one. Statis says, is it time to scrap BOP in the next GTE rules? Every year we see a new car, destabilizes the gaps, resulting in games from teams. Will FIA and ACO change anything in the upcoming years? Perhaps manufacturers building new cars at the same time. I'm going to answer that one quickly. I don't have a problem with new cars coming. I'm not a fan of BOP. I understand, as we've said repeatedly on this, the reasons for its existence and indeed some of the advantages it brings. Where I am now done with BOP is I'm done with what seem to be arbitrary changes being made with absolutely no attempt to explain the rhyme, the reasoning. Tell us why you've made the specific change and tell us exactly what you expect to achieve by making that change. There's no reason, as far as I'm concerned, why we shouldn't get those two answers. I think at the moment it's got to the stage where it's either opaque to the point where it's impenetrable or there's politics involved, and I'm bored with both of them. At the end of the day, I'm asked constantly to explain why it is that balanced performance is dealt out the way that it is. The reality is I'm going to put my hand right straight up here and say, I know what the systems are, I know what they're designed to do, and at this point today, I don't actually have as much confidence as I should have that the right decisions are being made.
Well, there you go, being all declarative and intelligent. Please stop doing that. You're setting a bad precedent for me. I'm going to take the next question from Michael Mast. Time and air date. Well, Michael, it is 1:57 p.m. in California. Air date for this will be, I'm guessing, within about an hour. So, thank you for asking. Let's see. Alex Ike Miller. Could you ever see a time where a GT3 class runs at Le Mans? Well, it does. It's just in the it's just not in the proper 24-hour race. But for what you're referring to, Alex, GT is great, but lacks the diversity of the GT3 classes. I mean, this is something we get versions of this question on a somewhat regular basis. Graham, I think as long as GT3 continues to be the intellectual domain of one Stéphane Rattel and the SRO organization, and the ACO and FIWC is the one putting on the 24 Hours of Le Mans, that might be a bridge separating this possibility. What do you think?
I think the answer is you've nailed one part of the equation. There is a difficulty with the difference in lack of technical regulations for GT3. It would be nice to see that gulf between Stefan's team and the ACO team be bridged once again. He was, of course, not that long ago, part of the board for the Le Mans series. I remember him sitting in a kind of board presentation which involved the late and very recently departed Martin Perrain from Lola. But I think for the moment that's unlikely to be the case. There's too much commercial rivalry between the various packages involved. I'm perfectly happy with where we are with the technology and the mix we've got with GTE. I don't think it necessarily manufacturer they came along, that'd be all well and good. There's nothing wrong with that class structure. If things moved, if we saw like an Audi and Porsche-esque decline, then of course you'd look at it. But at the moment, don't see really that the need is there to do that. I like GT3 racing. I like GT3 cars rather. Where I tend to have a problem with GT3 racing is when the entire grid is GT3 cars. That tends to take away something, I think, from the spectacle. It takes away something from the variables that come with multi-class sports car racing that I thoroughly enjoy. And that, for me, is the division.
Let's wrap up here on Facebook, Graham, and then we will switch over to Twitter for the last handful of questions, and then we will bid farewell to the all-listener 24 Hours of Le Mans purview. Hey, I'm making up new words again. This is great. I went an episode or two without that. The Marshall Pruett podcast presented by Cooper Tires. Our Dutch-Nigerian, was it, or Dutch-Cameroonian chocolatier enthusiast Shaia Adam is back with another question. It, because we've determined it's an it, that's a correct pronoun here. They, them, that, something. You get to spend one night hanging out with any series race director. Completely relaxed and fun situation. Food and drinks endlessly supplied by the universe. Who and why?
I can tell you. I have to say, I would regard the gentleman that is Eduardo Freitas as a friend. I've worked alongside him at a number of race meetings. We work in the same orbit at WC. We work actually on the same organisational team with my role with the Asian Le Mans series. I do get the chance to sit and spend some social time. Fabulous, fabulous company. Is very generous in terms of the information he allows me to access for that series. Not able to do so with the WC with his FI role. A stunning human being. I think much misunderstood by some. Respected, not always liked, universally by drivers in the series that I cover. Enormously good company. I think quite often, though, MP, and I'm sure you might reflect on this before your choices, it tends to be those guys that you do get the opportunity to spend time with and just peel away the onion layers with, which tends to be the case with the very best of the race directors.
My choice, probably not a surprise, and that would be Bo Barfield, IMSA's race director. Known Bo for a good while. He is a racer, someone who was very talented in junior open wheel racing in North America. Yeah, well, first of all, Bo is a bit of a rolling party as it is. His home in Houston, and half of it's dedicated to his guitars and amps and pool tables and you name it. Obviously had to recover from the flooding that wiped out his house and many others and rebuilding there. So unfortunately, he's been through the wars on that front. But, Bo and I disagree on many things. I mean, we just avoid politics altogether. So that's one area we stray. His fondness for cigars is something that would turn my stomach pretty quickly. So, we would have to have some lanes here that we make sure that the party continues and it's just pure fun. But, I love the guy, just on a personal level. And part of that appreciation comes, Graham, from he and I do not agree, not just on rare occasion, but quite often. And I will write something that is critical, and instead of getting some sort of what the hell response, it'll be a, hey, why did you think that? What led to that? Or vice versa. And I try not to write things that, just say, what the hell, Barfield? But, he has his job to do. I have mine. We respect that. We know that it can't always be positive and warm and referential to one another, but he is more than willing to explain things if he knows. Sometimes if something happens on track, he'll reach out to me and say, hey, do you want to talk about that thing? Because he'll know that at my pea brain, I'm thinking, hey, I should talk to Bo about that thing. So he'll, reach out first or vice versa. But just as you mentioned with Monsieur Freitas, there are obviously lanes that he can't go into because of his professional role and responsibilities. But like Eduardo, I appreciate the fact that with Bo, if you ask a intelligent question, he will absolutely answer it and will do his best to at least walk you through the mindset maybe of an unpopular decision. And that's different than many race directors I have worked with or come across who say, hey, that's my decision, deal with it. You're not a part of this organization. I don't have to justify anything to you. And, nor does Bo have to justify anything to me or anyone else. The fact that he's willing to help those who are trying to tell the sport's tale, arm them with more knowledge than they might have about a situation, certainly respect that. So it sounds like we have two folks who we greatly appreciate on that front.
Excuse me, aren't we lucky boys? And genuinely, it does sound like they're very common souls in this, that they respect the guys trying to do a traditional job, and in not always easy circumstances, but because you've not got that immediate access to all the information that they do. And I agree, that generosity in terms of ensuring that we do get the best opportunity to get it right is a wonderful thing. We're lucky. I think we've got a final question, fella.
Yeah, do you want to take that one?
Well, let's go for it. Hey guys, you've seen the BOP for the GT Pro and GT Am. Why are they different? Why should BOP be a thing for what's essentially the top class of GT racing? Surely manufacturer investment wouldn't grow more than what they already spend trying to fool the powers that be. It's a good question. It's a wide-ranging question. The first part of it, why the difference between the two? It's a difference between a full pro um, class and a pro am class with cars that are to a design that are a year up to a year older, rather at least a year older than is allowable in GT with a different subset of cars. As for why BOP is thing, a couple of reasons behind that, but principally it's to ensure that it gives manufacturers making that investment, you quite rightly point out, David, a reasonable chance of racing success. It's trying to build on the lessons that history has taught us, that if one or maybe two manufacturers dominate, then the others don't tend to stick about for that long. So what it's trying to do is to ensure that there's a reasonable chance of success, whether or not the baseline product that you brought to the regulations is ultimately as competitive as perhaps the best in the class. I get it. You and I, MP, have both, storms of classes where you've got manufacturer classes with two, three, four cars in a class. It's not a great place to be. The end of GT1 and GT was a pretty tough one to take for a class that had been that great. Watching the two Corvettes, for instance, for an entire season with no competition. It had its moments, but it wasn't massive entertainment. And I think that's exactly what they're trying to avoid with BOP. Whether or not they've got it right, I think we've answered that question. Certainly I feel I have earlier. I think it needs another look. I think we're in an era now where if it's going to be embedded in the way that it has been for quite some time, they need to think about how they communicate the reasoning behind some of the decisions they're taking.
I'm going to jump over to Twitter here as we start to wind down. The Ford chicanes are in sight, Graham. We're getting close to the end of the lap here at Circuit de la Sarthe. My pal Riley Brennan, out of the current active drivers, what is the ultimate driver lineup? Any difference if you were talking GT or prototypes? So, of the current drivers, Graham, in this year's race, would you have an ultimate driver lineup to offer in either GT or prototype? And I'll take whichever one you don't.
Ultimate driver. I think Neil Jani is a guy of massive, massive talent.
Damn you! Okay,
huge talent.
You took
there. You
took
go.
him
So
off
Neil
the
Jani
board right away. All right, I guess I'm a GT. I'm going. Clearly, I'm in GT. Go for it. All right.
I'm going to go as well for Andre Lotterer. I think Andre is supremely talented, very, very focused, edging towards what's happening on the Toyota front. I don't know enough yet about Fernando Alonso and his abilities behind the wheel of that car. Torn between two, maybe three guys here. Sebastian Buemi, who I think is, one of the very quickest of all time in those cars.
Oh, yes.
Could do, though, with perhaps putting a smile on his face a little more often, takes all of life a little too seriously. Mike Conway is another man who could be been accused of being a bit like that, but is very, very fast indeed. And Kaz Nakajima, he's just blindingly quick everywhere. So for me, if I'm forced into the three, I'm going to go with Andre, I'm going to go with Neil Jani, and I'm going to go with, today, Mike Conway.
All right. Well, since I have been forced into GT. Now, this is great, and well, how's this? I think you had the easy choice, because the relative number of truly elite in prototype, I would say, is thinner this year with so few factories there. In GT, whoa, and how's this? I'll just stick to GTE Pro, because GTEMs, there are some in GTM that I might actually pull forward here. But let's see, of the factory GT entries, he's a little bit crazy, but I think that's good. I will take Tony Vilander, first of all. I think good old Tony is just a nut. I will take Antonio Garcia. I think Antonio is also fairly insane in that regard. And again, there's so many to choose from here. Again, we're just talking fastest, not necessarily the most complete, or some of the other things, but just raw, crazy, insane speed. Man, where do I go? I mean, you could just take one of the Porsche GT team entries. I mean,
Oh,
you could essentially just say
any of them.
the 93 car, Patrick Pilet, Nick Tandy, Earl Bamber. I might just say that car. I mean, honestly, that's about perfect. I mean, Vilander, again, crazy speed, but also so aggressive. Garcia has long been the Superman of sports car racing. Mild mannered, but gosh, you throw that guy in a phone booth. Um, yeah, I mean, if I had to pick one guy to hunt someone down in the closing stages of a race, no matter what car it was, in GT, I mean, there's Antonio Garcia and Nick Tandy between those. I mean, but again, Timo Bernhard, Romain Dumas, Sam
Nicky
Bird.
team.
I haven't
Nicky
even
team.
mentioned Sebastian Bourdais, Scott Dixon, Dirk Mueller. I mean, Dirk, again, this. All right, here's the real answer. Riley, I hate you. That's a cruel question because there's no way I can answer it. But yeah, those are my three, even though I gave you nine. So I apologize. Carlos Villalobos asks, more than a question, please reflect on dear Martin Bahrain, who passed away over the weekend, and Lola. Would you like to do that, knowing that he was definitely a man from the British Isles, and the mark that he owned in Lola was certainly a lovely, loving, most beloved product of your homeland?
I've written a quick piece that's not quite hit the web yet, but I'll give you a flavour of some of this. And I would hate Martin's epitaph to be that he presided over the final failure of Lola. I think his epitaph is that he saved it, and he saved it for a decade and a half to great success with huge race wins in class. They were the epitome of a customer racing race car producer. Um, I'll give you a very personal memory of Martin, which actually does have a little bit to move motorsport, but not that much. Martin made his fortune in property development. I happened to be in a day job in a situation where we were crossing swords with Martin. We had to buy, by regulation, by legislation, his beloved company headquarters, a beautiful building in central London, because we were building a railway line through the rear of the property. He was extraordinarily unhappy, and I was party to a couple of meetings where that negotiation took place. And it was one of those moments. I'd met Martin a number of times. He clearly, was used to me in race circuit mode. Clearly recognised something familiar about the guy in the business suits sitting at one end of the table. Didn't quite put two and two together until 3 days later at Silverstone for the Le Mans Series, where he was a board member. We had a State of the Series press conference, and Martin was on the top table, and he was scanning the room. Eyes are lighted on me. And despite that, and despite the anger that had been tied up with this, well, justifiable anger, we had a very civilized conversation. Two guys with, lives passing in two different ways in just a few days, and I thought he was an admirable individual. I frankly wouldn't want to be the wrong side of a business deal with Martin Bahrain, but 82 years, well lived. A young driver bumped into me today in the paddock at Le Mans. Young lad called Sean Doyle, Irish kid who did a few races in LMP2, is working there in hospitality, is no longer terribly active. Said to me, I just wanted to say this about Mr. Bahrain, and that's how he said it, Mr. Bahrain, is that we wouldn't have Mondello Park in Ireland. Got my first foot on the ladder. Effectively, he said, I got into Formula Ford incredibly cheaply because Martin put his hand in the pocket and made it happen for me. And you know what? That's not an unusual story at all. Rest in peace, Martin, because you added something to the core of my era of sports car racing that I will never forget.
Oh, well, let's do this. Your Wi-Fi is starting to give us the Steve McQueen Le Mans salute. All right, so we're going to do 3 final questions on Twitter before we wrap here with our 24 Hours of Le Mans preview. Going to start with Rick McInturf, who asks, why isn't the ACO pushing harder for more Garage 56 innovation? And I think it's important, Rick, to point out this is a invitation created by the ACO to invite innovation. It is the equivalent of saying we're going to open our doors to new chefs to bring in wonderful, never thought of, never, pioneering, cutting edge cuisine. And, well, the method of doing that is wonderful. You are inviting in folks to bring in new tastes, new flavors, but you're really just placing the role of the ACO here for what it is, and you need to, I should say. They're opening the door. They've created invitations. It is not upon the ACO to push anyone to do more or less innovation for Garage 56. They have created this invitation for many years. A number of manufacturers and small concerns have accepted the challenge. Many have failed to even turn up. Those who have, I think we have celebrated both the Delta Wing, Nissan then following up with their own version of the Delta Wing, Monsieur Sauce, who showed up, continuing to do wonderful things there for the partially abled. I mean, there have been some cool acceptances for folks who actually turn up and actually do what Garage 56 is intended to do. It sounds like Graham just had Taco Bell there. Our apologies. But you can't argue or push back on them if folks aren't turning up with things to push those boundaries. Ultimately, it's an invitation, and if manufacturers, big or small, are interested, then it is upon them to turn up with something innovative. But I, again, would not put that on the doorstep of the ACO for failing to do anything on their part. I'll
give you a couple of answers on it, because there are going to be some things emerging that we're aware of. One is that you mentioned Frederic Sausset and fantastic quadruple amputee effort at Le Mans. We already know that his La Filière disabled athletes will be getting a entry into Le Mans 24 Hours, we believe in 2020, for an all disabled team. There is another project I'm aware of that is just around there in the background, which is another field of just a bit of human endeavour side of the innovation. And we mentioned earlier in the show, MP, that we're expecting to hear some outline of what they're looking for in the 2024 regulations. Don't count out seeing BMW in Garage 56 before 2024 with something that involves a hydrogen powertrain.
Wow. Well, that's pretty awesome. Let's see. 2 to go. 2 to go. Let's see. Where shall we wander? All right. Ben Edwards says, loves the podcast. I'll be saving this one to listen on the way over to the track. And on that topic, Ben, I need to get busy here once we're done putting together 4 or 5, I don't know how many hour road trip to Le Mans podcast. So you can download that, or folks can download that if they're traveling in, flying in, whatever, and have something nice and long to hopefully make it more enjoyable. He says, do you have any advice to give someone that's attending the race for the first time? Certain places to be at certain times, off-track things to visit. What would you suggest for Ben?
Right, number one, start. Start on the start-finish straights or at the first turn, and the same for the finish. The festival atmosphere is unmatched. Get yourself around the circuit. Get down to Tete Rouge. It's an easy walk. You can make that pretty quickly. Just make sure you're well hydrated if it's sunny, and make sure you're wrapped up if it gets wet, because getting cold and wet, not a good thing over a 24-hour race. Get to the museum this year in particular. Your race ticket, as always, will get you into the Le Mans Museum. It's at the main gate. It's a golf racing exhibition this year with some significant cars from the Rothko collection. Must see. Beyond that, if you have the time and you have the inclination, get out to the Porsche curves, get to view there the awesomeness that is the high-speed flick-flack nature of the Porsche curves. You can also use the buses or indeed your own 2 feet. It's a long, long walk. Get down. You can't get into the woods for the run down to Indianapolis, but around Arnage there are new viewing banks you can see through Indianapolis and through to Arnage. Great new views that weren't available until a couple of years ago, and you can get down to Mulsanne Corner as well. Do all those things. If you don't manage in the year one, put a tick in the diary against the ones that you do manage to get to, and do it again the following year. You will not go just once.
And Ben, I would mirror everything that Graham just offered. It is a walking circuit. It's not one where there's some other tracks where you can kind of pick the perfect vantage point and see lots of things. That is not Le Mans. So, bring comfy shoes. You're going to be doing a lot of walking. Bring liquids to be hydrated. But if you want to enjoy and you want to see what makes these cars spectacular at this amazing track, prepare to do a fair amount of walking. I can tell you, well, granted, this is from the media side, so this is having, on the other side of the fence type access. It's not always the friendliest or most inviting thing. You get a lot of no. There's a lot of no's, a lot of roadblocks. Don't be surprised, even with just, a general admission pass. Don't be surprised if getting to where you want to go might have a few people not being overly inclined to let you get there. Just be patient and be mindful that, again, getting to the places is most important. If you have to put up with a little bit of something or a lot of congestion, a lot of folks thinking the same thing, just be mindful that you're at an awesome place and you'll get there. But heading down towards Tete Rouge, as best you can view that section of the track, either on the inside or outside, that's a big blast of speed, and the cars going down into the Mulsanne Straight. That is something to see. I would say while there, Graham has pointed out a lot of the things that are pretty darn awesome. If you get to the inside of the track, for the most part, there you'll find campsites. Those can be fun, if you're a people person. I don't know how many languages you do or don't speak, but it tends to be a fun party atmosphere type thing. If you have 1 or 2 beers in your hand and you're willing to hand one to someone else, you're probably going to make a lifelong friend. That is very much the camaraderie of Le Mans. But yeah, getting down in towards Indianapolis and that area, it's a lot of fun there. Some good folks to enjoy. I would also say that outside the track, Cathedral's amazing. I don't know when you're getting in, how much time you have. If you want to head out towards the coast, World War II memorials and such, that's a drive. That's going to take half a day. But, France, whether you speak French or not, it's a beautiful place. You're going to meet some pretty cool people. The world converges on this little region for this race, people coming in from all over. So even if you do not speak French, you'll probably find a lot of folks that do speak English. And I will just say that not knowing where you're from in the world, Ben, do something silly, like go to a McDonald's and just see what it's like there. And if it's any different from your experience from wherever you live. So, yeah, there's lots of great stuff, lots of great food, and it's also kind of fun to see some of the versions of things like McDonald's and the differences compared to where you might find them at home. So, yeah, altogether, if you're going for the first time, if you can hopefully get back for a second time, maybe you can do a little bit more wandering out and seeing the sights outside of Le Mans. But I would just say that if you're in on a relatively tight schedule, being able to say that you saw as much of the on-track activity, the cars, the people, you name it, I would say that would be my priority if I was going for the first time. More of the travel adventure parts of seeing France and Le Mans. If I had to pick one over the other, I'd hold that off for my second go-round. All right, let's get to our final question that I've chosen here, Graham. And this one's maybe a little bit personal, but Brian Dawkins says, Dan Gurney built the All-American Racer Toyota GTP cars. AAR was involved in the Nissan GTR LM and the Delta Wing as well, Brian. Said, did Dan ever have aspirations or inclinations to build a car of his own for Le Mans? From what I know, talking to Dan, I mean, there was certainly a desire there, but keep in mind he was a businessman, and Toyota at the time had no interest in funding a All-American Racers built prototype to then go to Le Mans and compete against whether it was Group C regulation type cars, WSPC era and such. So wasn't so much at that stage, business-wise, Brian, in a position where they would just build their own and then go race it or hope to sell customer versions. The reason I chose this was just to mention, Graham, maybe a little bit of a sidebar to close on. That was full props for IMSA at the 24 Hours of Daytona. Dan died shortly before the Rolex 24. And the folks at IMSA, the folks at Fox that covered the race of the broadcast, IMSA Radio, you name it, everyone paid, I would say, more than ample tribute to the Big Eagle, knowing what a contribution he made to the sport. That ran counter to what took place in May at the Indianapolis 500, where Dan and his All-American Eagle Mark, responsible for multiple victories there. Dan being known as one of the great innovators of the sport, his fingerprints all over Indianapolis. The broadcast from ABC, they should be ashamed of themselves. They didn't say a word about Dan's death, his loss, his importance, anything. It's as if it was as if he didn't exist. Truly embarrassing by ABC. Indianapolis Motor Speedway, they had a tribute lap done in a car in an All-American Racers Eagle Indy 500 car, and that tribute lap, good on them. I thought it was dreadfully insufficient, but, again, maybe that's personal bias being shown. I do not know, Graham, if the ACO or the WEC has any plans to mention or honor Dan. Obviously, last year, 50th anniversary of the big win for him and AJ Foyt with the Ford GT40, and big celebrations as well. I do know that I sent an email to WEC CEO Gerard Naveau saying, if you need anything, whether it's photos, graphics, something, if you did plan on doing anything, more than happy to help. Haven't heard back. I'm sure he's busy, but I can just say that at least from this side of the pond, knowing that you and I do our Week in Sports Cars podcast is intentionally, half American-centric, half European-centric. You are primarily on World Endurance Championship. I primarily cover IMSA. So we try and bring our worlds together for you, the listeners. I hope that you enjoy. I'll just mention that in this instance, having seen IMSA get it 100% right, and the Gurney family was so pleased and felt so honored. I got notes afterwards, after Indianapolis, that they were truly saddened by the complete absent-minded treatment towards Dan. I would hope that our friends at the ACO and WEC, knowing that this is, an American figure, not someone who is a presence in their lives by any means, but someone who has meant so much to sports car racing and was an overall winner 51 years ago. I'd hope something happens, Graham. They don't have to. Just saying that if you're going to honor a man whose life meant so much to the sport and has died this year, akin to Martin Bahrain as well. Martin did not contribute nearly as much, but we're not ranking quality. I'm hoping Martin and Dan and any others who we've lost will be a part of some memory, because the history of the sport, frankly, continues to fuel and sustain us every day in what we do.
The answer is I don't know, is the straight answer there, but I can tell you, if you're at the track, or if you're listening in to the Radio Le Mans broadcast, I can tell you this much, that Dan and Martin will certainly be featuring, I think, pretty heavily in what's become a fine tradition at the beginning of the broadcast, yes, the race broadcast, which is the Roll of Honour. Always too long. It marks the passing of friends, colleagues, and anybody else that's been involved in this fantastic, wonderful business of entertainment of racing down through the years. Dan Gurney will be certainly honoured, and that is the correct word there, as will Martin Bahrain, with that role of honour. If you're listening into the broadcast, just pay attention and listen to some of the stories there. It's everybody from Dan Gurney at one end of the spectrum through to a young 8-year-old drag racer at the other end. Some very sad tales. Dan's was a life beautifully well led. Heroic is not an overstatement of it. And whatever else happens at Le Mans in terms of a look back, that some of the heroes are no longer with us, guaranteed that the team that will be covering it for you guys will be remembering it. You can remember it with us.
That has been the first, and hopefully the first of many, all listener-driven previews for a major endurance race. Graham, thank you first of all for thinking of it. I think I had the idea, or the concept in my mind, that we would have a lot of fan questions. You're the one who said, let's just make it 100%. And so good on you, and thank you. Thank you as well for making time here and for persevering through some Wi-Fi issues. And I'm going to have a fun time editing out a lot of dropouts that hopefully you won't notice too much in the final edit here. Also, thank you, Graham, for coming together to help make our Day at Le Mans podcast, which we put up our second one today, and hopefully folks are enjoying that. First and foremost, thank you, dear listeners, for contributing your questions, for listening in, and for continual encouragement for Graham and I to keep making the time and to keep doing this. It might sound trite, but it is not said in such a manner. We genuinely do this for you, and hoping that you enjoy it. We already do this for a living. We already talk about sports cars and write about it every day, so the fact that you all listen to it and ask us to keep doing it, it's a pretty darn cool thing. So thank you.
I'd say with this much to close from my end of the crackling line of communication here, which is whether or not you're watching the race or listening to the race or following the race, whether you're doing it from trackside, whether or not you're doing it with TV, with radio, with our friends in all those industries as well, enjoy it. It's a joyful, joyful thing. And it is a thing to be, I think, savoured and to be valued. There's going to be 60 cars, 180 guys, all the teams, everybody else involved in this, looking to make this a safe and successful race. It's the way we'd love to see it, and we'd love the stories that come out of it to be positive, and we'd like you to be part of it.
And since my cat Rocky has just jumped up on the table and meowed, which you probably heard, that means it's time to feed him. It is time to end the Week in Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast, presented by Cooper Tires. Graham Goodwin, you are a gem. Thank you, dear listeners. We will be back tomorrow with Wednesday, well, maybe tomorrow, maybe Thursday morning, with the next installment of the Day at Le Mans. And I'm off to edit this sucker and put up as soon as I can.